down, you bastard!
Brought to you by supporters who probably have better taste than this schmuck.
Two combiners, brothers in design. At first glance, these two might seem like standard original release and simple redeco. I mean, that's how most releases work, why would this not operate the same? Take a closer look, however, and you realize they're more closely interlinked than many of their contemporaries. One would pretty much not exist without the other. Volcanicus only exists in the form he does because the designers knew there had to be a change in loadouts after the failure of the Power of the Primes version. In an effort to make the balance work better, they changed it so that it was based on how Dinoking would normally function, allowing a proven plastic mass distribution system to do its magic. And in doing so, they backdoored the existence of Dinoking. Everything was done already, so why not make one? Volcanicus exists in the way he does because of Dinoking, and Dinoking exists in its entirety because of Volcanicus. Two combiners, two brothers in design. However, we've seen that the compromises made previously did have an impact on the Dinobot team, especially with the SS86 references the designers threw in. It's even led to many collectors claiming Volcanicus doesn't count because it's not a true rendition. I don't agree with this assessment, but it does show that the compromises were pretty noticeable. But at present, I don't particularly have the full picture. I only really have half the story, what the designers were mandated to do, not what they actually wanted to do. If you'll indulge me, today I'd like to take a look at the other side of the coin. Greetings, Cybertronians! I'm DrLockdown, and today's diagnosis pertains to Legacy United PulseCon box set Dinoking and the Dinoforce that makes him up. And before you ask, yes, I know everyone and their mother wanted this to be a versus review with Monstructor. I've seen the comments and yeah, nah, there's just no way. Firstly, a versus review of two combiners? Are you mad? The amount of work for something that would be completely confusing would be insane. I can only really think of one instance where that could possibly work, and this ain't it. And secondly, the theses between these two are just too fundamentally different. Each has a completely different idea behind it and deserves its day in the sun. We'll get there eventually. Fear not, we just need some groundwork first. Of course, given this is a pretty basic redeco of an existing figure with only minor changes, I'm going to primarily focus on the differences from old Volcarona. If you want information on the conversions, articulation, and most of the sizing, go watch that original video. No use repeating myself in these instances, so give that a watch if you need to. Instead, I'm going to go through each figure in order, then the combined mode with the discussions on how things changed. Cool? Cool, let's go! Now, while the purpose of the Legacy Dinobots being the way they were was to backdoor the Dinoforce into the toy line, this was not considered in their actual releases. As mentioned in the last review, they instead took heavy influence from their SS86 counterparts, or at least they did when they could. The actual Dinoking mechanical detail and paint layouts were not considered at this stage, so when we get around to this box set, we run into a few issues. Kakuryu is a black and white robot that turns into a gremlin thing with a gold torso, who then shoves himself inside an entirely green dinosaur shell. I've already explained why they did it this way back in the Volcanicus review, so I'm not going to bog this down again. This led to a slight problem. How the actual do you do this on a mold that flat out isn't designed for such? Well, instead you take inspiration from the Toon model, then just let the alt mode turn out however it does. This might seem like a pretty hefty compromise, and possibly a big disappointment for the first time Dinoking has properly been able to shine since G1. No Fans Project doesn't count, as that thing disintegrates pretty poorly. But looking at the lineups, it's only really on the same level of compromise as the Dinobots, and since these are far more obscure characters in general, most people were just really happy to see them finally get their day in the sun. Maybe that's why Monstructor got so much leeway with all of his issues, which, believe me, we'll get to eventually. So for all the dinosaur modes, they really have to stand on their own 2 feet, not afforded the grace that comes from a screen model to derive from. Luckily, in Kakuryu's case, he's decent on this front. Not amazing, and the paint application is definitely a bit wacky, but he's doing it okay. The gold is alright. It's hard to get gold plastic down pat, especially after the old mixing issues of the late 80s up to the mid-2010s. Yes, the last great sufferer of gold plastic syndrome was in 2015, albeit not quite gold, but still the same effect. But sure, go on about how Takara releases are always better. My main issue is that there's just a lot of it, perhaps a bit too much. Because they've allocated all their effort into recreating the robot modes in paint form, which sure, that's fine as that's the only thing they can do really, parts like the tail, head, and especially the back section are just so underdone. Granted, the back was also pretty sparse on sliding slinger, but the silver plastic pulled it off a whole lot better. It also makes the white legs stand out a hell of a lot more, which is a shame because this shade is quite lovely. It's got a lovely lovely pearlescent finish to it, not quite as nice as last week's subject, or I guess one of last week's subjects on account of being caked on a bit too thickly, but still. And the face comes across quite nicely. I would have loved some paint on it like his Dinobot predecessor, but the red zones are a cool touch. And this is still the same mold, still the same lovely detail, still the same nice chunky dinosaur fun, and the coloration issues don't bother me that much. They could be a whole lot better, but they also could be a lot worse. My only real issue I take is how the tail section doesn't quite do as well, with the new head sticking out pretty poorly. I get why it is this way, but it's still a downgrade. They clearly designed this section to fit in specifically with Volcanicus's head, and since they can't retool this back section, I totally get why it is the way it is. Maybe they could have painted it to match the legs though, make it stand out a hell of a lot less. But you know, budget for the robot mode and all. And said robot mode almost makes up for it. It's definitely a bit jankier than the original, but it still looks pretty cool overall. The new head sculpt is utterly gorgeous, all masked up with a rich metallic blue. They've even painted the inside of the dino head to better blend in, which I think is a pretty cool trick. It's subtle, not like, say, putting a giant painted combiner hinge where one isn't meant to go. Yes, that is my bugbear. I will die on the hill that this looks ugly as shit. Unfortunately, the torso is a bit of a downgrade. The gold really doesn't pick out very well. It bleeds just way too much from underneath, which sure is understandable with the whole pigment density thing. Gold is essentially yellow, so it makes perfect sense. But interestingly, it's not a problem on the arms or the aforementioned head, both of which were on the same plastic color and likely the same sprue. It's just a wee bit confusing. Still, at least the red splotches are nice, and the combiner pegs no longer look like nipples. I think the limbs are what make this turn out a whole lot better. They just look so much fancier. Even the caked on white does a good job. While I personally would have preferred something a bit more stylized instead of just trying to paint the broad strokes of the anime model, at least this effect is a lot subtler than, say, this eventual punching bag. And said limbs really do help him lean into the dynamicism, drawing your eyes to the points of the articulation he does have, as limited as they may be. It leads to a pretty good robot mode overall, with a nicer visual feel than his progenitor and a slightly better robot mode. Decent trade-off, I'd say. And hey, the dynamicism even gets way better with additional weapons. Yes, according to the original plan from the designers, the Dinobots were initially meant to come with handheld accessories and combiner bits, but were unfortunately costed out. Whether these were designs new for Dinoking or just carried over from the previous releases, they're a pretty cool inclusion, and they fall into two categories, pretty much. Bits from the combiner and bits from the combined weapons. Kakuryu is designated bits from the latter, and quite a few as well. The gun is pretty cool, albeit a smidge hollow. The gunmetal and shaping do most of the work because the actual mechanical detail is sort of just passable. You do get some nice detail in Axetown population your face. It's very anime with the line work, which is quite fitting. The handle is a bit daft though, especially with the random gun on the back. But I guess it makes sense given it has to gut-eye a bit later. Actually, maybe not. Do wish you could hold the gun separately, but alas, the ports just don't line up. Ah well. And of course, you still get the head and midriff bit, which is fine, I guess. But a bit moot next to everything else now. Seems like they just didn't care about this part at all, to be honest, between this and the lacking cohesion. Kakuryu is a pretty fun start to the set. He's sort of just holding the line with how he gets everything to work, balancing the jank he was handed reasonably deftly. Of course, a ground-up homage would do better, though I wouldn't know how you'd reconcile all the bits that compromise him. But as a simple redeco with the resources the designers were given, much like Slendy Man, he manages to do all right. And hey, at the end of the day, it's a core class figure. It's gonna have some compromises, especially under Hasbro Corporate. Still better than, well, this review isn't about him, but you get the idea. Now this is how you reimagine the Apatosaurus mode. This here nearly doesn't work, and it teeters ever so slightly to the edge of kinda gross. Unlike Kakuryu using paint for the white parts, Rairyu uses white plastic, and it's not great. It's got that same candle wax look to it that the infamous Maverick from Collaborative tried years ago, only here they've tried to give it a gloss finish, and it just looks really bad. Once again, it looks like this section really had the potential to f*** up the look of the whole thing, especially as there is a lot of white plastic here. So, it's a good thing that these colors are mostly kept to themselves at the bottom, letting the golden gunmetal go to town up top. Yes, by pure coincidence, because I don't think this mode was ever the intent, these bits really managed to draw your attention away from the grossness down below. Especially the gold with how it frames the dino head in a sort of faux helmet. Despite both having gold around the neck section, they end up with completely different vibes. The gunmetal isn't too shabby either, making this seem a whole lot less like random legs just sitting there. The color combo even helps draw your attention away from the gaping hole in the middle. Doesn't make it go away entirely, but hey, deco smoke screening is always a plus. And if you need more diversion away from the underside, he actually has extra weapon functionality in this mode, where the combiner feet become massive rocket pods. While these aren't perfect, they're definitely more hell yeah than hell no. They actually make pretty decent armaments, and the angling is on point. Really, the only issue is the combiner pegs on the sides, but I don't see how they could have gone much further than this with the budget. And as we've seen with some previous combiner upgrades, sometimes overcomplicating combiner kibble isn't the best idea. Unfortunately, they do look a bit goofier on their robot mode configuration, though perhaps that's because of the arm posability. It always looks a tad silly, which is unfortunate, but understandable. What's less understandable is the robot mode with all the white front and center. This just really looks awful. The gold completely vanishes, leaving nothing but the gunmetal and a bit of silver behind. Yes, this is accurate, but did you have to use this awful shade? Just cast this in a different white plastic, or use a different finish. It just washes out all of the detail and makes the existing issues seem way worse. Sludge was already a pretty compromised figure, the most out of any member from this set. So to do even worse, it just begs belief. It's an unholy mix of bad deco and iffy sculpt, and where Sludge was able to overcome a lot of those issues, I don't think Rairyu is. The only thing I can genuinely say is better is the head sculpt. This is honestly quite gorgeous, especially with the extra gold. But what good is that if there's no gold anywhere else around the body? The design makes perfect sense. What they're trying to do is textbook, but it just leads to a worse robot mode overall, and when the Apatosaurus acts as more of a side grade as is, yeah, we're one up, one down with this. Thankfully, the next member brings things back on track. We end up with an improvement in every possible way. You know, it's kind of funny how the T-Rex ends up as the leader in both instances, and how both get relegated to leg duty. Guess everyone's complaints about Grimlock being a leg were completely moot. And I mean, Scrapper doesn't seem to complain much. Wouldn't you want a team leader you can lean on? In this case, quite literally. Goryu really proves that coloration was the main issue with Grimlock. With a decent amount of breakup, he really manages to shine. The helmeting around the whole head sculpt, much like Rairyu, excellently gives him a meaner vibe. Makes him seem a whole lot snarlier, not like that, or like that. But you get the idea. The green helps hide the ball joints a whole lot more. They're still there, but they don't look weird and out of place like they did originally. And conversely, it also makes the arms stand out more as well. I still wish he had more details around the neck section, but it's definitely better. Even the backpack looks far superior. While the original seemed super clunky in a similar vein to his Power of the Prime's counterpart, this uses the foot paint to blend in more, appearing more like a purposeful weapons pack instead of just kibble. I even prefer the paint layout on the tail weapon. Never noticed it until now, but the original's paint ironically made it stand out a lot more. Also stopped it from sucking up the paint budget from elsewhere, which is a plus. I mean, they even fixed the white plastic. It's not complete and utter dog shit like it was on Rairyu. Though it's a little easier to see on robot mode than dino mode, but even then, this is a very nice robot mode. And again, the main issue seems to have just been the color breakup. When you give the eye more to look at, where you can actually tell when a limb starts and ends, it's obviously going to look nicer. And the color combo is really nice, especially with that deep lush green. I know I keep using this word as I have a nasty habit of reusing words for a bit in scripts for some reason, but, well, gorgeous. Gorgeous. Now that's not to say the simple act of changing the base plastics automatically fixes everything, because the deco designers have also done incredibly well. The feet remain as cool as previously, and the torso now doesn't need toy hacks to properly pick out the window detailing. It's not accurate in the slightest, but god damn does it look sexy. And of course the fists and dino toes return, so he can slice as he punches. Great stuff. Even the head looks fantastic, wonderfully jagged with a lovely tritone punch of silver face, red eyes, and pearlescent white helmet. See, this is the kind of white Rairyu should have used. On everything. No, I'm not joking. Now, accessory-wise, things are a bit odd. You've got the tail gun from before, and it's fine, but it feels way tighter than it did previously. Like, the tolerances have been messed up a bit. Not sure what's going on here, and the entire inside has been coated with gunmetal now, which, sure, I guess is neat. But much like the original weapon, it feels like that budget would have been better served elsewhere. Weird choice, if you ask me. Still, if you don't vibe with this, now you get a club weapon. That will eventually combine with all the others. It's okay, nothing special, and it gets the job done. But honestly, it doesn't have to be, as the rest of this guy is quite gorgeous. God damn it, I did it again. Why must I hyperfixate on certain words when I write the script? This isn't fair. I guess it goes to show, coloration really was the biggest problem with Grimlock. Not the only problem, but in retrospect, probably the biggest one. So glad we were able to fix that up. Good to see you back, T-Rexy boy. Ah yes, pretty much the only reason Scar got a figure in the first place. Yes, I was mistaken, he wasn't original, he was a medic in the IDW comics, but let's face it, this was the whole reason this member was chosen, and the whole reason the lineup combines the way it does. He pushes the same colors as Goryu, and they're pretty good. Not as good, but pretty good. I've also just realized I've done these in the order that I did the original Dinobots in, and set order coincidentally groups all the colors together in lots of 2. Huh, neat. I think the push to more gunmetal makes him a little more boring than Goryu, but is still rather nice. The mechanical detail is really what makes him work, with all those awesome ridges on the top. Part of me wishes we got that stiletto detailing on the middles of the legs just to break things up a bit, but still, it's pretty good. And the head looks really lovely in green. While featuring the same sculpting, it brings a completely different vibe. These have done a fantastic job reinterpreting the Dinobot designs with new paint schemes so far, with the exception of Kakuryu. They even redid the Thagomizer section to better blend in with the dorsal fins, and the cohesion is turned way up. The detail nearly perfectly matches, and it's a nice swap for the box set. Unfortunately, this brings me to my one gripe with this mode, aside from some pesky QC with one of the front legs falling off. The Thagomizer is kinda too big, and it looks way more like a fist, where with Scar it blends in a lot better. For photography, you can pose the fist section to hide it, but in general play, yeah, it's a bit naff. I do get it though, they wanted to deliver a better fist section for the combined mode, and this sacrifice was pretty much the best way to do it. And this might just be a me thing, I know some folk vastly prefer this to the original, so, you know, knock yourself out. Plus, while I would have preferred both be included, that's mostly a me thing. I can't imagine any universe where it would make sense to include both in the same pack. Unfortunately, said Thagomizer makes a pretty piss-poor weapon. It would have been a really cool club, but instead you get a really mediocre gun that's completely hollow on the top. Again, I think this is an element where Scar's Thagomizer did things better, though that came at the cost of the combined mode, so Gairyu's is probably a better trade-off. And hey, it's not too hateful when you get a robot mode this lovely. I mean, it's not that surprising, being the same deco as Goryu, which was already delightful, but Scar has always been a really fun release as is, marking the real shift in quality throughout the original sets when they began to hit their stride. I'm kinda surprised they redid the head, as Gairyu was already pretty close to the IDW design, and they easily could have used the same on both. Still, great way to differentiate the two, even if I slightly prefer Scar's. Sort of the same with the torso, the white cut across gives the two a very different feel. I still kinda prefer the thinner look on Scar, as this overrides a bit with a lot of green, but it's pretty neat when juxtaposed against the massive grey shoulders. And they've actually got some differentiation on the arms now, which is nice. I am a bit bummed out it came at the cost of the legs though, they look incredibly plain without the extra stripes down the middle. Accurate? No, but I think a bit necessary to give the bottom half something. But of course, as mentioned earlier, this is really the turning point for this lineup, and consequently he doesn't have to rely on a deco as much, he just works a whole lot better as a standalone core class. The core, no pun intended, just so happens to be a more solid affair. That's not to say deco isn't important, last week I literally just went over the importance of deco in the overall vibe of a release. Still, it's a good base mold, and even if this is a step down, it's still a nice figure. Though it is interesting, although I prefer the Scar mold overall, I think in these new colors, the Grimlock one shines a lot better. Goryu is just able to make this color scheme work far more effectively, despite being an opportunistic redeco compared to a ground-up mold designed for Gairyu specifically. But hey, worse doesn't mean bad. It's like a minuscule step below, and it'd be even less if he came with a better Thagomizer. And still a great desk toy, that's something I always find difficult with combiners, especially Legends combiners. The push to only focus on the combined mode. There's always extra joy to be had with individual releases, and it's really important to spend time with them outside of the big bastards. But of course, big bastards always get the focus, so maybe it's important to give smaller f***ers a shot. Give them some love, you know? You know, it's funny, do any of y'all know Finch? Not the bird, well, kind of the bird, more so the mental health and productivity app. I actually named my first bird on the thing after Yokuryu, but then my phone f***ing died when I was trying to film next week's review, not only making me lose about 500 shots worth of work, but also making me lose several months of Finch progress. I had to start from scratch, so maybe I'm a little biased against Yokuryu as a character, but this just feels a little bit boring. It's again the deco, they've brought back that sickly white, and annoyingly the entire figure is cast in the stuff. Yep. All of it. The entire figure. I get the swoop was also like that, but like, just use a better shade. Goryu managed this fine, you don't have to use the semen wax shade. Swoop is decent detail, but all of it gets incredibly washed out. Yes, Toy Hacks can absolutely fix it, but it shouldn't have to, and unfortunately it can't fix how gappy the head looks now. The only place that still has paint is the legs, covered in way too thick a blue that honestly looks out of place. And you can't even distract with the combine accessory because now it's just a fist. Yeah, the Thagomizer wasn't great, but at least it did something. I don't need Combining Kibble to do stuff, it's perfectly fine when it doesn't, but when this alt mode does basically nothing, you'd think the accessory could provide some fun. Thankfully, the robot mode does a little better, a smidge messy in the torso compared to how clean Swoop was, but overall an improvement with the addition of extra blue. You can actually see the two shades of white plastic here, the softer, ickier material and the harder, crisper stuff. It really goes to show that they didn't need to make that much of a change, just don't use this finish on this tone, it's that simple. And the blue paint is really nice, especially on the head. They haven't changed this one, but it kind of makes sense given how it has to fit into the pterodactyl design overall. And yeah, the paint is again way too thick, but yeah, it could be worse. Weapon is awful though, doesn't even fold in a convincing way. It's a fist facing upwards no matter what you do. Though I can't be too mad when the budget is fairly limited and the combined arm ends up benefiting from it quite a bit. Yokuryu is easily the weakest member thanks to his deco changes, which is such a shame considering how good his original swoop base was. I reckon the paint just ended up getting eaten up by the accessory, leaving pretty much nothing else for the rest of the body, especially after the legs needed so much. A combination of box set f***ery, poor plastic choices, and a generally unforgiving mold layouts led to this just being I'm actually kinda annoyed I didn't realize until now that this thing was as clunky as it was, chalking it up to the very thing I wanted to avoid, not spending enough time with the individual combiner members. Yes, the base mold is fine, but this might just be my least favorite core combiner member of either of the two legacy sets, simply because of the visual aspect. What can I say? Paint, sculpt, and general aesthetic are important to me, and you really shouldn't be using this shitty shade for anything. Sure, every combiner has a worst member, but really? From this mold? Are you serious? Ultimately, this is definitely not the worst core class figure I've ever seen, as it has a solid base. But when other members in this set are doing really bloody well, this just ends up a massive disappointment. Thankfully, we end on a much more positive note. Doryu balances the blue and white far more effectively, leaning way more into the not shit white. The blue still remains applied way too thickly, but with a better visual balance, it's not quite as hateful. And you've actually got specific elements that help this feel like a proper alt mode with the returning dorsal fins and painted front legs. The kind of stuff Gairyu was missing. Head's a bit plain and the fists now stick out a smidge more, but by and large, yeah, this is a good new look for him. Not necessarily better, but it doesn't betray the mold to the level that Kakuryu does. Even the feet blend in rather well, which is a bit funny. We'll say the combiner joint does seem a bit more blatant thanks to the sprue choices, but by and large, it's a decent side grade. Given how amazing the original was, at least this isn't betraying it. And the robot mode takes it a step above with the inclusion of some lovely silver. It reminds me of one of those old Tim the Toy Man knockoffs Australian IGA would have back in the day, specifically the one that was based on Prime Cutthroat, only, well, not dog shit. The new head sculpt is painted nicely, even if it's not sculpted as well as Snarl was. And the base blue torso blends in really well with the painted parts. The white even helps him look a bit better proportioned, though basically identical to Snarl, the difference between white and blue looks a lot more clearly defined. Really, I just wish he came with more silver because the stuff we do get looks genuinely pretty great. And the shoulder spikes don't look as good as the original Snarl, and they don't hide the hollowness as well, but the effect is still there, and definitely, well, I should really stop shitting on Monstructor and save that for the actual review. Even the accessories are pretty neat. Yeah, I kinda lost the sword that came with the original Snarl, sadly, but it is a rather nice sword and a fun inclusion, if a bit plain. And the scythe is a smidge silly, don't get me wrong, but it's a cool thing to add to the posing, which remains decent on this figure. Yes, you're still dealing with the stupid shit of limited articulation in certain areas, but this is a fun closer. Mold-wise, this is still the best of the bunch, so even with a slightly diminished paint scheme, it's still a pretty good time. With all the highs and lows, I'm very pleased that this set ended on a good note. Not an absolute peak like the last set, but definitely a good point to leave off. And lineup-wise, I think these two form a pretty gorgeous team. The duoing of each color sets with the white as a through line is a killer aesthetic, especially in robot mode, funnily enough. Sure, I wish so many of the members didn't get stuck with that icky shade, but in a team, it's not that big of an issue. That doesn't excuse them, but it does put it into perspective. While I think the Dinobots made better individual releases, these six feel more cohesive as a whole. They just work together better, you know? It's funny too, while Grimlock was my least favorite of the original lineup, Goryu ends up being my favorite for the Dinoforce. Yes, most of the issues became a hell of a lot less frustrating when you've got an actually nice deco on show. I'm glad this mold was at least temporarily able to break free from the curse, at least before the third release turned it into that. But that's neither here nor there, a story for a later date. Perhaps next month, perhaps later. Let me know in the comments if you prefer a video on Monstructor next or Dr. Wu Devastator, keen to talk about both. Either way, if you want these for individual play experiences, they might not be for you, but if you want them for the team as a collective, even not combined, which I know some do, they're a solid lineup. And hey, unlike some examples, I'd say they're good enough to apply toy hacks to and fix up. I've already done it once already, I might even do it again before the next time we see this mold. We'll see. For now, one more mode, the one most people get this for. How does this fare? Well, pretty good to be honest. It's not quite as cohesive as Volcanicus, who had the boon of an entirely together color scheme that wasn't cut short randomly by individual limb pieces, but it's still a nice redeco. It definitely feels the most like Dinoking out of any loadout in this set, especially now that the specific placement of robots and positioning of the dino kibble. Even proportionally, this feels a lot closer, though it does feel a lot wider than usual. Thanks to the new colors, particularly with the difference between the torso and the waist, he comes across as quite the wide boy. Not bad, but definitely, well, wide. Doubly so with how high the head sits. I feel it could have been sunken in a lot better, like Volky's was. Still, decent head sculpt, probably my least favorite of the three, but rather nice with his chiseled expression and gorgeous blue helmet. Will say though, the torso does look a smidge unpainted with how the gold ends up front and center. Probably could have used some extra on the gun pods or maybe some on the face, but unfortunately this goes a bit accurate to a fault. Not hateful, but a bit undercooked. Thankfully, this is the only undercooked part of the deco. The rest goes pretty damn well on the colors. I never realized until recently that it's sort of a designer of halves with the limbs, and it's a really cool way to do the breakup. Maybe I would have liked some extra gunmetal on the side to tie everything together, but otherwise it works pretty well. Again, I'm not particularly sure if it's as good as Volcanicus with the coloration, but it's still pretty snazzy to look at, and, much like when putting it into a group shot, does well to mask some of the less than desirable shades. Of course, being a box set, it probably wouldn't be okay to just do a bunch of redecos and call it a day. Shut up. So they give you a whole bunch of extra accessories. The weapons, as mentioned earlier, combine into two different loadouts, a halberd and a gun. The latter is kind of weak sauce, to be honest. It's a recreation of the G1 toy, which is fine, but you get stuck with this tiny gun on the side and it's just tacked on there. I tend to leave it off, which is better, but then the gun itself is a bit small for the design. Can't really win, I'm afraid. Thankfully, the halberd works a whole lot better, even integrating the snarl sword really well. I find it very nice you get both toon and toy weapons in one go, so you can go for either loadout depending on what you have more affinity for. Or if you have no affinity for either, like myself, you just pick the one you like. Options are good. Unfortunately, the final accessories are a bit underwhelming. And unfortunately, those accessories are kind of the draw of this set for many. Dinoking graces you with new hands and fists, and they're a bit of a letdown. Better? Absolutely. Perfect? Nah, not particularly. They do add a bit of extra articulation with some ankles, wrist swivels, and even upward wrist tilts, which would all be lovely. But for the latter two, it means you have to jam the combined biceps between the robot junk. Yokuryu's looks really nice, but it makes the hip section awkwardly sit between the wings. And Gairyu's is even worse because it actively pushes against the shoulder joint, making the arm forever stick out to the side, never quite able to remain straight. That's fine for someone like me, a pansexual dumbass, but not really fine for a robot arm. And this doesn't even have the benefit of looking good. The forearm still looks unfinished, not as unfinished as Volcanicus, but still absolute hollowness galore. It's better, make no mistake, but it's still not quite there yet. I do understand, what the f do you do here while still keeping the Thagomizer functionality intact? But still, it could be a whole lot better. And that just leaves the feet, which, again, they make him better, but I feel they could have also used more time in the oven, or at least more plastic quantity. They're just too flat, like he's wearing armored up shit everywhere, then thongs down below. Aussie thongs, not American thongs. Yeah, if you think I'm making a dirty joke, maybe look up the difference in language and you'll see what I'm actually talking about. They do help the proportions a whole lot, but they sit way too far behind the armor plating, and they just don't have the girth they need. Also, actually engaging with the ankle tilt is such a pain because they fall off so easily. The port isn't deep enough and the actual ankle tilt is incredibly tight. Great idea, not so stellar inclusion. In fairness, I'm not sure what you could do here. The budget was probably very limited. Even getting these in the first place is a plus, but this still feels like its potential wasn't quite met. Like, same as last time, let's just add the DNA bits for a sec. Not everything, as this isn't a review about those parts. Just the forearms, fists, and waist section, though admittedly I'm not so sure about the last of those as it tends to limit the articulation a bit. I think the Volcanicus set did that better, to be honest. But like, properly proportioned arms make the coloration work way better, the cohesion way more cohesive. With proper feet that are taller and go further out, he gets a better sense of power. Again, this doesn't make the Hasbro hands and feet bad. These are absolutely good inclusions, especially if you're a Hasbro purist who would feel a sense of disgust by adding quote-unquote fake bits to a figure. There are collectors like that, and these are a decent option. But at the same time, they're not quite at the level I wanted them to be. At least make the feet sturdier, is that too much to ask? Side note, while the DNA feet are in use on on the combiner, you can actually give the old feet to another robot with extra fold-out 5mm pegs. Really nice addition that they totally could have gone without. Of course, I'm aware comparisons to DNA Design are going to generate some ire. As the years have gone by, I've noticed some growing hatred for DNA Designs as an upgrade company, mostly spearheaded by some of my friends. You know who you are. Hi there, love you dearly. But with those arguments being there, I feel the waters are being muddied on why they do what they do. So often folks get furious that they're corporatizing upgrade kits and making things unnecessarily expensive. And yeah, they are expensive, but I don't think it's a greed thing. If you look at how they operate, it's really mostly a misplaced eagerness. They can get a little confused, but they do have spirit. The big three complaints I hear are the plastic sucks, they're too expensive, and they include too much. The first two really just boil down to the mechanics of third-party design. The plastic isn't particularly good in the same way iron factories can be a bit cheap. It's all to do with access to factories and materials, they just don't. That doesn't excuse some of their releases, but it does explain some of the reasoning behind it. As for the price, well, that's just economy of scale. Hasbro puts out millions of products each year at any given factory, allowing them to keep the costs of most releases down comparatively when they aren't taking the piss. According to third-party designers I've spoken to, most 3P figures range in the 5 to 10,000 unit productions, a micro niche within a micro niche. DNA Design is even smaller than that, and with fewer numbers being run, of course it's going to be more expensive. And finally, the useless pieces, the fact they add a bunch of stuff people complain no one wants, except people do want them, and that's exactly why they get added. DNA Design listens, perhaps too much. They have their DMs open on Facebook, and I'd assume the same applies to whatever Chinese outlet they use. When people ask for additional pieces to be added, they usually acquiesce, perhaps to a fault. Like the gap fillers in the Volcanicus set were an addition after the fact. I've even asked them to add bits to their MPG Raiden kit, and I got exactly what I wanted. Not sure if others asked, but they do listen. We don't know if this actually inflates the price or not, as they claim it doesn't, but we'll never really know for sure. But people do ask for this stuff, so it makes sense that they'd listen and add it, even if it leads to a bunch of pieces that the majority don't end up using. So they're not a corporate entity that deliberately jacks up prices and delivers shitty product because people will buy it anyway. Not that I find their releases shitty, sometimes pointless, sure, but more often than not, quite lovely. No corporation truly has anyone's best interests at heart, but at least in DNA Design's case, it's more so being a smidge too eager with what they have, which I can respect. Tangent aside, this is an option, and 3D printed kits are an option, and not using them and using the Hasbro ones is an option, and leaving them off and using Volcanicus's bits is an option. You've got options, and ultimately Dinoking is a good enough combiner to warrant these options. Although I unfortunately find myself breaking this rule more often than I'd like to admit, I try to follow the rule of only upgrading figures I like to make them better instead of the ones I dislike to make them good. I try not to waste money on already shitty figures, and Dinoking is not a shitty figure. He's actually quite good, and I'd argue worthy of adding upgrades to. Does he need them? Well, that depends on the collector. For me, he kinda does, as Volcanicus did, but for some people, he may be utterly perfect out of the box. Hopefully all you've seen here will give you the lowdown and allow you to make a proper decision. Of course, if you still don't know and want a general statement, I do think Dinoking is good enough to take a chance on. If you like the way he looks and understand the compromises you're getting into, you're in for a good time. Maybe less if you already experienced Volcanicus, as this mold set does seem to have diminishing returns as it goes along, but still, it's a fun set. It definitely does better together than it does apart. When you start to separate the members and really put them under scrutiny, cracks start to show, way more so than their predecessors. But put them in a group shot in either loadout or have them combined, and they really start to shine. I do ultimately think Volcanicus is a much stronger set overall. While Dinoking is good, there isn't particularly any moment that stands out as especially better, even without the addition of external upgrades. And yes, Dinoking does come with dedicated hands and feet, but they ultimately just end up feeling haphazard, and part of me just misses the simplicity of the original. Though external upgrades are the way to go regardless on both of these, but still, it is only a half step down overall, and if you're more into what Dinoking offers, there's nothing that'll particularly stop you from enjoying this. Fact is, you probably already know what you're getting going into this. While this and Volcanicus are fundamentally intertwined, Volcanicus is definitely the main event. While the concept is baked in at a base level, the end result still seems like a bit of an afterthought. A pretty good afterthought, but an afterthought nonetheless. That might not be for you, but then again, neither might Volcanicus. Don't go into any of these expecting third-party levels of solidity. This is a set of fun and janky toys that make something charming, not perfect. But if you know what you're about and you can accept both the jank of the original mold and the new version, this might be the figure for you. But as always, fandom public consciousness is a conversation, so drop your thoughts on the double homage process that birthed this king below. Are the compromises worth it, or have they engulfed both Volcanicus and Dinoking into the abyss and ruined the chances of proper versions forevermore? Do you prefer the original, or do you prefer the Victory hotness, even if he doesn't scale with any of the other Victory figures, aside from maybe Galaxy Shuttle? And please, for the love of God, can someone clarify if the original G1 Dinoking is gold plastic syndrome? I've heard both that he has it and he doesn't from different people that all actually own the damn thing, and no one can agree on a consensus. Somebody please clear this up. I can't tell if people are getting confused with Monstructor or not, who definitely does have it. But until someone answers and resolves my pain, remember, there's a context for everything. Till next time.